January 1945. Bastogne, Belgium. The roar of a German Tiger tank fills the air as it advances through the snow-covered streets of Bastogne. The enemy is confident, their heavy armor rolling forward with crushing force. But in an instant, the ground shakes as a Pershing tank fires its 90mm shell, tearing through the cold air and smashing into the Tiger's turret. The blast is deafening, sending shards of metal flying, the tank's fire extinguished in an instant. For a brief moment, the battlefield is still. Snow swirls around the wreckage, and the sound of battle fades. Inside the shattered German tank, the crew struggles to comprehend the destruction. Another Sherman tank rounds the corner, firing methodically, its crew calm and efficient in the chaos. No celebration, no sign of relief, just a cold, calculated execution of procedure. The German forces hesitate. A second tank, another hit, another instant kill. The shock is unmistakable, this is no accident. The myth of the invincible Tiger, the feared German armor, begins to crack under the weight of American firepower. The ground feels colder, heavier, as the Germans realize their advantage has turned against them. The battlefield is quieter now, but the tension is palpable. The Americans are no longer just holding their ground, they are beginning to break through. And for the Germans, the war is about to change forever. By the last week of December 1944, the map around Bastogne narrows to ice hedgerows and 7 frozen roads that decide whether a division lives or starves. Inside the town, the 101st Airborne holds under Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. Outside the ring, the spear that must break in is Patton's 3rd Army III Corps, under Major General John Milliken driving the 4th Armoured Division led by Major General Hugh Gaffey. The immediate purpose is not glory but a ground corridor, get fuel, ammunition, plasma and engineer teams into the perimeter so the crossroads does not die behind its own snowbanks. Across the line the plan is simpler and crueler. 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel tasks XLVII Panzer Corps under Heinrich von Luttwitz to keep the belt tight. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division under Heinz Kokott digs in around the approaches Panzerlehr under Fritz Bayerlein, shuttles armour to choke the southern routes, and farther north the 2nd Panzer Division under Meinrad von Lauschert hunts depth to the west. The arithmetic the German staff prefers is starvation. Cut the roads, wait out the weather, push leaflets and an ultimatum. Watch the rations run out, receive the garrison's surrender without paying Tiger-class losses. Weather almost makes the math work. From the 21st to the 23rd, the ceiling closes, and the town is a white bowl, no transport can find. Artillery fragments freeze into the drift. Medics heat morphine in their hands. Gun crews count fuses tighter than they count hours of sleep. When the sky breaks, on the 23rd, bundles begin hitting snowfields and streets, and the perimeter's pulse steadies. But the problem remains. Without a land route, the drops are chance and thin, and the defenders cannot rotate, wounded, or bring up heavy repair parts. Every hour without a corridor deepens the bet that Bastogne will yield to hunger rather than high explosive. On Patton's side, the operational grammar is direct. The 4th Armoured takes the main thrust on the Arlon-Assenois-Bastogne axis. The 26th Infantry Division and the 80th Infantry Division grind on the flanks to keep German counterattacks from soaring through the column. The tank battalions trade speed for traction and burn gasoline at a rate the quartermasters do not like, but the order sequence does not change. Close punch, hold the seam open long enough for supply echelons to pour through. It is a procedure, not a duel. If the leading company is stopped, the next company pushes. If a bridge is cut, engineers lay another. If visibility dies, intervals contract, and the column keeps moving by compass and wire. German belief is still anchored in a pre-war shape of victory, the besieger's dominance over time. A ring around a crossroads in winter should mean inevitability. Panzerlehr has the reputation to back the confidence. 26th Volksgrenadier has the infantry mass to sit in the woods and make every lane costly. But the force that is supposed to suffocate the town is also racing its own logistics. Fuel trucks are scarce, tank recovery is slow, and every destroyed bridge reroutes more than armour. It reroutes hours, and the ring's pressure measures itself in hours. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne compresses its perimeter into something that can absorb shocks without cracking. The men learn the rhythm of snow and shell bursts and adapt to the thin line of resupply. The town is not winning, but it is not dying on schedule. Outside the perimeter, the 4th Armoured's lead elements begin to touch the outer German pickets along the Assenois woods. The first contacts are ugly and short trades of high explosive at ranges where the snow hides as much as it reveals. Yet each contact moves the problem from abstraction starvation into something immediate and local. Can a battalion clear the next hedgerow, and a company hold the road long enough for trucks to pass? The stakes for each side are asymmetrical. If the corridor fails to open, the garrison's stocks dwindle to a point where rifle companies fight on half loads and batteries silence tubes to save charges. The town becomes proof that encirclement still rules the continent. If the corridor opens even a single lane, the besieger's myth fractures. A starving fortress that refuses to starve is not a fortress. It is an anvil, and every hour after that favors the side that can feed it. Commanders feel the time pressure differently. McAuliffe needs the next day to look like the last lines intact. Casualties handled, ammunition redistributed, drops recovered. Milliken needs the next hour to change. The last kilometers gained a village, cleared a stream crossed. Lutwitz needs the next night to erase the day counterattacks, to seal the seam artillery, to beat back the wedge patrols, to cut wire and sow doubt. Manteuffel needs the weather to betray the Americans one more time. The road south of Bastogne decides which logic survives. Snow closes in again. Engines, lug, radios, hiss, and the calculations on both sides narrow to a single question. Will the leading tanks of the 4th Armoured find the engineers of the 101st before darkness and fuel meters force them back? The outcome is not declared in speeches or slogans. It is measured in a corridor wide enough for one truck, then two, then a line of headlights pushing through the blizzard. Snow narrows combat to what a crew can see through a slit and what a gunner can stabilize for 3 seconds. German strength begins with the geometry of a hedgerow lane and a stone gable. A Pak 40 sits back from the road in a farmyard shield, dark against a stable wall barrel laid on the approach where tank tracks will bite and slow. A Volksgrenadier squad threads through gardens with Panzerfaust tubes under greatcoats, using outbuildings to break line of sight. A Panzerschreck team waits at a doorway with the blast area cleared, firing angle already measured to the corner where an American driver must swing wide. When these pieces combine, the first vehicle into the village is forced to stop present armor at a poor angle and accept a hit measured in meters, not guesswork. Artillery multiplies the trap. Nebelwerfer salvos rake the road just as columns compress to cross a culvert. The sound is a tearing cloth that moves men to ground before they think. Shell fragments scythe low and fast, puncturing water cans and bedrolls and the thin things that keep fingers working. The intent is simple. Make the enemy halt, then let the static target economics of a prepared gun line finish the job. The weather strengthens all of it. Wind carries engine noise into the trees and away from listening posts. Muffled visibility turns a field into a blind corner. Ice makes talk the enemy. Clutches chatter, and treads skip instead of dig, so the driver must correct at the very moment a gunner needs stillness. In that moment, the ambush lives. The American answer is not a duelist's boast, but a checklist turned into muscle memory at company scale. Tanks lead, but only at ranges where a sight picture is certain, and infantry can keep shoulders close to engine decks. Riflemen move wall to wall and floor to floor, choking off the short rush a Panzerfaust needs. Engineers cut wire, blow gates, and lay bridges that look temporary because they are. Temporary is enough if trucks can pass. Forward observers claim a roof, a bell tower, a hedge bank, and talk artillery onto any muzzle flash that reveals itself for 2 seconds too long. The rhythm is identify, acquire, fire, relocate. It sounds like radio brevity. But it is the line between a crew living and a crew joining the salvage list. Armor reflects that rhythm. A lead Sherman carries extra track links and sandbags, not as myth but as insurance against the first glance of a Pak 40 at the wrong angle. A 76mm gun fires high explosive as often as armor-piercing, because smashing a window frame or a loft is how you sever the approach path for a Panzerfaust. Smoke is not decoration. It is the difference between being sized up by a gunner with a saved range card and disappearing long enough to break his sequence. When a jumbo is present, its weight takes the corner first and absorbs the first question mark. When a Hellcat is available, its speed becomes a knife lancing into the yard where the pack sat and stripping the shield with 50 caliber fire until the crew drops from the trail. Artillery adapts to the street. Time on target missions are trimmed and stacked, not the pageantry of a rolling barrage, but a hand closing around a single block. 1 minute the guns are silent. The next minute 5 shells arrive together from different batteries, and those who lifted their heads to shoot are now counting splinters in their coats. The signal to shift is a short word from an observer whose world has shrunk to a wet handset and a frozen pencil. A typical contact along the Assenois approach begins with a stalled column before a hedge break. The first tank trades a second of exposure for a shot at a suspected gun position. The round detonates behind a wall, showering the lane with tile. Infantry surge past the glacis plate, 2 men at each doorway, muzzles high, then low the way they were taught. A Panzerfaust hisses from an upstairs window and misses long. The gunner, blinded by his own backblast in snowfall and smoke, never sees the machine gun traverse to his sill. In the next 100 meters, a second kill zone appears, this time a Shrek at ground level. The tank does not contest it directly. A platoon leader calls for smoke, the driver drops back 1 hull length, and the company angles across an orchard rather than take a straight alley that has already been measured by someone's rangefinder. None of this is improvisation. It is a procedure that assumes the enemy is competent and builds survival from that assumption. German limits show at the edges of these engagements. Every gun position burned or abandoned leaves a gap that cannot be filled quickly. Fuel shortages mean a damaged Panzer IV may sit where it stopped until nightfall, masking friendly fire or blocking a counterattack route. Recovery vehicles are few and overtasked. A bogged car becomes a geometry problem for hours, not minutes. Platoon leaders who want to mass a response find themselves pulling squads from thin pickets that must also watch other roads, and the counterattack that should be a hammer becomes a stiff push, with 2 companies and a handful of assault guns. The ambush doctrine is sound, but doctrine without the time to reset is a fuse that burns once. American limits are different, and answered with logistics more than with heroics. A column that expends smoke and high explosive faster than planned radios, rear echelons and trucks begin to nose forward as soon as a lane is called open. A bridge, blown by retreating sappers, is measured, spanned and flagged by engineers who have done it enough times that the motions look like a drill because they are. The leading units do not wait for daylight to tidy the route. They hold the seam, mark it with guides and accept traffic while the edges are still dangerous. If a tank is lost at the corner where the first pack hid the space it occupied, is taken by the next tank without ceremony. A second encounter miles from the first reads the same. A gun flashes from a cowshed. Artillery slams the grid square. Infantry strip the walls. Armor noses through under smoke. The column moves. When the same cadence recurs in a different village with different barns and different frozen ditches, even those who expected American caution begin to register a fact: the enemy is not trying to win a duel. He is trying to survive the next corner faster than you can reset the trap. Numbers reveal the shift. Ammunition expenditure skews toward high explosive, and smoke the choices of a force suppressing ambush points rather than courting gunnery purity. Requests for immediate suppression from observers stack on nets, a sign that the brigade has learned the timing windows and is attacking those windows, not just the units in them. Reports note shorter dwell times at contact, shorter pauses after fire, and more frequent lateral moves by tanks who refuse to reenact the last crew's death. In this cold arithmetic, perfection is not required. Repeatability is. The winter helps both sides hide and both sides fail, but it helps only one side build a method out of failure and try again before the defenders rewire the street. By the time the corridor nears the southern edge of the town, the fight feels less like a duel and more like a machine cutting grooves through ice and stone. This is not an accident. This is repeatable. Wind scrapes the hedges and carries exhaust into the trees. The German gunner rests his cheek against cold steel and watches a slice of white road through the sight. Range card taped by the breech numbers, penciled with a shaking hand that refuses to admit it is shaking. The loader has a round already half lifted, counting the gaffer's breath, not the seconds. The squad with Panzerfausts crouches behind the stable wall, tubes hidden under greatcoats, boots, sunk deep in churned snow that smells of damp wood and manure. The procedure is familiar. Let the first American tank nose past the gate, wait for the side plate, kill the lead and fix the column to the lane. Then the rockets go in at window distance. It has worked before. It should work in this weather, in this village, on this road. Tracks grind somewhere beyond the orchard. The driver calls it low and steady like a train far off. The gun captain whispers one figure, and the gunner cranks the wheel 2 turns, breathing into the optic to make the reticle swim, then pulling back before the lens frosts. The loader palms the round up to the tray. The shell coat squeals against the guide. The gunner rides the blur and tries to guess when the machine out there will hit the rut he has memorized. The barrel stops with a clank the whole crew feels in their teeth. The hedge shakes. A glacis plate scrapes into view under a veil of snow and smoke that smells like tar. The gunner can almost read the cast texture. He wants it to be elegant like a training shot, but it is a smear of grey and black moving too fast. He fires. The carriage kicks. The recoil takes the breath from his chest and gives it back as powder grit. The shot snaps past and detonates behind the tank somewhere among fence posts. They hear wood splinter and a horse scream once as if a door slammed on it. The loader is already feeding another round. He is swearing at the rubber on his gloves because it sticks to brass in this cold. The gun captain's voice is not confidence now, only speed. The gunner tracks left for the second chance. The tank has not stopped. It has and has not. It's slowed enough to spit flame, and then it is wrong again, darting through the opening the crew expected to pin. A second American tank lifts its nose at the lane mouth and spits smoke into the yard quick and mean. The world turns white-grey. The reticle finds nothing but wool. The Panzerfaust team steps from the wall to close the distance, 2 men forward and 1 man behind for reloads. The first man braces at a window and pulls the trigger. The rocket hisses across the road and hits a corner of moving steel. The blast throws slate and sparks, but the tank keeps shouldering into the yard turret, not even looking. The back blast in the little room knocks the aimer sideways. His helper drags him by the collar into the corridor. Someone is shouting for the Shrek at the doorway, but the doorway is now a hole with a machine gun's cone of fire drawn through it. 1 man in the Panzerfaust team tumbles into the stable and does not rise. The German gunner thinks to elevate for the smoke to aim above the lane and let a round fall into the movement, but a wall he did not expect bursts inward, and a second tank noses through a garden he did not measure. The loader looks at him for orders, and the gunner, all discipline, calls the quadrant. The barrel starts over and then hesitates because the traverse sticks where the carriage was never meant to angle. The shot goes late and high, and the reaction from the yard is a burst of heavy machine gun that chews chunks out of the shield. The gunner sees the sparks and pulls his face away from the optic. It saves his eye when the glass webs. Silence arrives for a heartbeat, and it is worse than sound. The driver says quietly that the road behind is no longer a road because a damaged lorry sits crossways with its axle broken. The captain says nothing for a count of 3, then orders the gun spiked if tow cannot get through in minutes. No one believes tow is coming. The crew drags the breech bag from under their legs. Someone laughs once, a short, dry noise that might be a cough. Powder burns into the cold air like a small funeral. They back away, stepping over brass that clinks against the floor. The same weather, the same lane from the other side is grease on fingers and a scent of hot coolant through wool. The American driver tastes metal from the heater duct and steers by the shadow of the fence posts more than by what his headlight shows. The tank commander keeps his head in long enough to feel his face again, then pops back up to count doors and windows as if they were numbers on a form. He is thinking about where a rocket team would wait, rather than about who lives in the house. The gunner talks to himself in numbers. The loader keeps the next high explosive ready because the next thing to die will likely be a wall. The column has already agreed to a pace that looks like impatience but is a choice. When the lead tank touches the hedge, it fires not to kill a tank, but to break the first place a man might hide. Smoke blooms where the yard opens. The driver takes the smoke not as cover, but as a claim, and pushes into it because nothing on the other side has had time to adjust. The commander calls the corner, the gunner snaps around into a window, the loader is already reaching for another. There is no room for celebration. When a rocket hisses from upstairs and misses long, the coax hums and sows the sill, then drags down the frame to the floorboards, where a second man might be crouching. Infantry shoulders bump plates and turn into the building as if they own it. They do not stop in the first room. They go through it. The radio nets are blunt. A forward observer 2 houses back calls a grid, and 5 shells arrive together, all sound and splinters and dust, and for 10 seconds the world belongs to the side that spoke first. Engineers drag a gate aside with chains and lay a plank across a churned ditch that would swallow a truck to the axle. The second tank carries the plank an extra span because the first always underestimates. Nobody wants to back here. Backing is what gets you killed when someone ranged the alley yesterday. The loader's hands begin to cramp. He clips his glove to stop it sliding on brass. The commander's jaw aches where the rubber of his throat mic cuts skin and keeps freezing into it. The driver tips his head once and coughs black. The gunner tells himself that at 200 meters the sight steadies if he breathes first and moves after. He does exactly that and puts steel through wooden brick into a position that was almost a gun. He does not wait to see the result. The turret slews and the driver steps, the clutch and the hull slides one width, and that motion, that single width, is what keeps the next rocket from striking square. The infantry outside call one word that means the yard is theirs. A man with a pioneer bag kneels at the wall where a Panzerschreck would love him. He does not look up. He counts the charges and pushes one under frost-black thorns where wire hides. The blast snaps the hedge like bone. The road is wider by a meter that matters to trucks. Contact ends without anyone saying it has ended. The tank commander drops into the turret and closes his eyes for 2 seconds. He pretends to check his map. The loader stretches his fingers and finds that one will not straighten. The driver asks for fuel, like a man asking for cold water. The observer in the rear house moves to a different window and calls the next grid before anyone orders him to. The infantry leave a pair on the corner because the corner is a mouth that might bite again. Farther up the road, a farmhouse burns in a square that makes its own light. Smoke pulls sideways in the wind and rips apart. The column moves. The village 2 kilometers on has a different church, a different yard, a different set of outbuildings, but the same geometry will try to kill them. The crew already knows what it feels like to beat that geometry by seconds rather than by luck. They know how the street sounds when a trap springs and finds only smoke. They talk less now because there is less to say when procedure becomes the only language that matters. They drive into the white. Orders do not move steel by themselves. They move people who move fuel tires, bridges and maps, and in the week around Bastogne, the side that turned orders into a repeatable method faster is the side that broke the ring. The decision chain begins days earlier, when Lieutenant General George Patton tells his staff to plan the 90-degree turn not as a rhetorical flourish, but as a routing problem. Road nets, fuel nodes, engineer assets, wrecker coverage and troop density are laid out as a schedule that can survive a blizzard. When 3 Corps under Major General John Milliken is pointed at the Arlon-Assenois axis, the issue is not whether the 4th Armoured Division under Major General Hugh Gaffey can fight. The issue is whether it can keep moving while fighting at night with bridges dropping out of the snow and enemy guns touching the column every hour. Doctrine looks glamorous when it is a book, but here it is a voice on a radio saying the same short sequence 100 times a day. Tanks break the door. Infantry clears the room. Engineers tear down the doorframe and rebuild it wider for trucks. Artillery is a hand on the small of the back pushing at exactly the moment the street tries to shove. The 37th Tank Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams embodies the rhythm in metal. Company commanders learn to request smoke before they think they will need it, because delay makes smoke a funeral wreath instead of cover. Platoon leaders learn to ask engineers for a plank when a culvert looks innocent, because a culvert is only innocent until a half-track drops an axle into it. Forward observers learn to call one grid square ahead of their fear. American speed is not the pace of engines but the pace of fixes. A knocked-out lead tank does not freeze a battalion. Recovery vehicles hook and pull, and if they cannot pull, guides wave the column around while engineers throw a span across black water that will bite men to the hip in one step. The span is rated for less than a doctrine writer would approve, but it only needs to live through one convoy. If a bridge collapses under a truck, the line behind does not become a poem about loss. The line behind becomes men on the frame unloading ammunition by hand to the next truck that can move. Procedure makes tragedy into inconvenience. Air resupply before the corridor opens is a lesson in margins. Weather grounds transports until the 23rd, and then the line between life and slow suffocation becomes measured bundles pushed into wind. Parachutes fall between shell bursts and into orchards, where both sides will later fight house to house. The contents are not romance, but calories and plasma and propellant and fuses, all of which turn into surviving crews and firing guns. The moment the corridor cracks, trucks take over because trucks do not miss the drop zone, and trucks can bring out the wounded and the broken machines. The change from airdrop to road train is the change from chance to plan. German decision-making in the ring is correct for a force that expects time to be a weapon. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich von Luttwitz arrays his corps to keep pressure on every road into the town and to bleed any relief thrust long before it sees the last hedgerow. General Major Heinz Kokot's infantry sits in prepared lines and mines the obvious husbanding Panzerfausts for door-size ranges. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein's Panzerlehr drips armor into the grid where it can matter most, buying time with the threat of engagement even when fuel receipts argue against movement. The expectation is that the garrison will shrink around itself as food and cartridges seep away, and that any relief thrust will become a wrecking yard of burned vehicles because winter punishes haste. What fails in that model is not courage or local skill, it is replacement. Every puck destroyed, every bridge finally blown, every tank immobilized consumes a portion of a stock that cannot be regained quickly. A mobile reserve that should cut the corridor at the hour of decision becomes a mixture of tired companies and a few assault guns with half their crews green. Recovery takes too long not because doctrine is absent, but because cranes and tractors and fuel drums do not appear when called. The ring grows thin where it should stiffen. American replacement is built into the logic of risk. If a lead tank is lost turning into a yard, the next tank turns into the same yard with slight differences already taught by the loss. If a company burns through smoke faster than expected, the battalion trains a resupply forward under fire rather than waiting for a quiet day that will not come. If an artillery battery strips firing plungers in cold weather maintenance, shacks them under canvas for an hour, while another battery takes the net with the same grid sheet. The enterprise resembles a factory, not because men are machines, but because machines and men are arranged so that failure in one station does not stall the line. This attitude reaches up the chain. Patton does not require a perfect plan to act. He requires a plan that can be corrected while moving. Milliken's corps staff accepts that columns will tangle and detangle in the dark and writes synchronization as windows, not as exact minutes. Gaffey's division executes to touch rules, keep contact with the unit on the right and the road under you, and do not stop except to shoot or to be pulled from a ditch. Abrams translates it into contact habits. Lead with a vehicle that can take the first mistake, follow with vehicles that can multiply the first success, and never give a dead corner a second look. American doctrine at the point of contact hardens into something a training circular could print because men have to remember it under fear. Do not take a measured alley if you can make a new alley. Do not contest a fixed gun from the angle it prepared. Change the angle or blind it. Do not stop where the enemy wants you to stop. If you must stop, stop behind smoke, and stop while artillery interrupts the other man's thinking. This is not the paperwork of an officer school. This is how a crew survives 40 meters from a doorway. German doctrine in the same street has the right shape, but lacks the time to reset. An ambush burns itself out in minutes if it does not kill. The crews must displace, and displacing on bad roads with frozen gearboxes eats the time they need to build the next shot. Staff officers who might once have massed a reserve along a lateral road find that lateral roads now carry refugees, towed guns, and the remains of units mauled in fights farther north. The Corps commander's intent, orderly on a map, breaks into 100 local fights that ask for fuel and shells he cannot deliver. The ring does not collapse at a single breakpoint. It frays. Industrial depth is not just a weekly output figure. It is the permission structure for risk. An army that can replace a tank does not throw it away. It drives it into the yard where the enemy believed steel would not go, because the cost of not entering the yard is higher than the cost of losing the vehicle. An air force that can replace aircraft does not keep transports on the ground when a window opens. It sends them into a sky that killed men the day before, because today the drop will save a line. A logistics train that can move over bad roads without waiting for spring does not treat winter as a veto. It treats winter as an engineering problem. The fixed ideas crumble in uneven order. The belief that starvation will make Bastogne a schedule item fades when the first line of trucks noses past engineers with blackened hands. The belief that armoured prestige can be spent to plug any gap fades when a company sent to strike the corridor waits for a fuel convoy that never comes. The belief that winter is an ally fades when the other side shows it can bridge, tow and resupply in sleet and blackout conditions with the steadiness of a shift change. American after-action habits matter. Observers write what went wrong and how to prevent it by procedure. Battalion journals note how often smoke was decisive and how often failing to dismount infantry at a corner cost a tank. Orders the next day read like a machine. Updating its settings more smoke loaded forward, engineers pushed to the head of serials artillery pre-registered on likely yards. The change is not a declaration. It is carts being loaded differently in the dark. German reports carry a different tone. They are not defeatist, but they are mathematical about loss and recovery, and the numbers do not produce the curve a corps needs when an enemy inserts a wedge. The staff still prefers starvation as a lever because it needs days to gather a striking force, and the wedge denies those days. Patrols report that the enemy declines duels and prefers to erase firing positions with heavy explosive and move past. Complaints about fog and snow are replaced by observations that the enemy seems to function in fog and snow without pause. None of this turns men into cogs. It makes cogs into lifelines. A driver who can reverse a tank out of a shell hole by feel keeps a timetable intact. An engineer who can judge by boot heel whether a verge will hold a truck keeps a corridor open. A clerk who can read the grid scribbled in pencil by a shivering observer keeps a battery on the right target. The sum of these ordinary replaceable skills is what allows extraordinary hardware to matter at the right minute. The corridor is the physical proof of doctrine and logistics, meeting weather and enemy fire, and still doing what the order said. Vehicles do not appear by magic in a snow tunnel. They appear because men upstream accepted that failure would happen and designed around it, and men downstream had the tools and the authority to correct without asking permission. On the other side, men with skill and courage ran out of the time and fuel their plan needed to win by waiting. America is starting to fight like an assembly line. Germany is starting to fight like a museum curator. Snow keeps falling, but the picture changes from hunger to contact. The road south of the town is no longer theory. It is a seam held by engines idling in the dark and riflemen stamping their feet to keep blood in their toes. The first trucks grind through and do not stop. Fuel cans clink against armor crates, rattle litters slide. The ring that was supposed to suffocate now has to act, not wait. That is the first fracture time ceases to belong to the besieger. The counterattacks come as doctrine says they should, feeling for the new joint and trying to pinch it shut. Infantry and assault guns nose down the same lanes that punished the relief column hours earlier. They find a road that looks familiar, but it is not the same road. The American habits that carved it are still in place. Guides stand with flashlights hooded to slits and wave convoys across gaps, while engineers shore a verge with timbers that steam in the cold. Artillery sits pre-registered on the yards that make good ambush positions. When a gun flashes from a shed, 5 answers arrive together, and the shed is a problem of splinters, not fire. It is not that the counter-attackers cannot fight. It is that they cannot make the seam pause long enough to stop moving. The second fracture is the admission of limits inside the German plan. A company that should mass for a night thrust does not. Fuel delivery is late or incomplete, and the march table breaks into packets that hit in sequence rather than in one blow. A tank that ought to lead backs into a ditch, the same planks just removed, and the recovery vehicle that could pull it free is already committed down another road. Reports stack at battalion that say the same thing in different words. The enemy refuses street duels and instead blinds and bypasses, forcing us to reposition under fire, and in snow we cannot master. Inside the town, The defenders stop counting days until their last rations and start counting crates that match what they need. Ammunition is redistributed by the hour instead of by hope. Batteries that had been silent to save charges begin to speak again. A wounded man who would have waited for weather is now loaded into a truck and gone, and the men who watch him go understand without being told that the logic of starvation has broken. A ring that could be trusted to do the killing over time has been turned into the more ordinary risk of fighting men, and fighting men can be met. At the seam, the posture flips. Earlier, the relief column pushed through prepared shots and made its own geometry by smoke and speed. Now the column holds its lane while others pass through. The same companies that broke the first traps break them again when the ring's patrols return to the same sheds and corners, and the repetition wounds morale. The illusion that winter makes everything static dies in small noises. The squeal of a new bridge pinning down on fresh cut, the rattle of a tailgate, slamming in the blizzard, the whine of a wrecker's winch paying out. Movement becomes a fact, even for those who wanted stillness to be their ally. Cold records start to mark the change. After-action notes from German officers that once described an enemy cautious to a fault begin to speak of an enemy who refuses to be fixed. Attempts to reclose the road result in losses that cannot be cleared before daylight. A single sentence captures the drift: we could not cut the road again. It is not despair. It is a measurement of the interval between blows that never lengthens. The tactical layer feels smaller and more personal. A Volksgrenadier squad works forward through an orchard at night, snow falling in soft coils that swallow sound. They pause at a wire they do not remember from yesterday and find it new-strung and tight. A flare lifts and makes the apple branches look like bones, and the machine gun that speaks from behind the flare does not fire long. It fires just enough, then stops to wait for the return fire that never comes. The squad goes to ground, the moment passes, and the road hums again with the tires they came to silence. At the same moment, in a warmed room, staff draw lines that presume closure, and then shorten them, and then erase them. A reserve intended for a decisive stroke becomes a fire brigade that never reaches a fire while it is still small. Bridges that should be down are enumerated and found to be down in the wrong places, while culverts the staff did not fear take trucks, because a plank made in the afternoon turns soft ground into a route. The map is still a ring, but the time values that made the ring meaningful are gone. On the American side, nothing dramatic is declared. The tone is the same as the day before, only firmer. Orders for the next daylight detail assume the road is open, and that the fight will now shift to keeping it large rather than proving it exists. Units in the town that had bled themselves thin step back a street and sleep for a few hours behind buildings that no longer shudder with hunger. The lesson that everyone pretended not to learn is acknowledged openly. The besieger's myth could be broken by making days shorter for him and longer for us. Losses continue. Vehicles burn. Men die at corners that look like 100 other corners. Yet each loss is no longer a notch toward surrender. It is a toll that does not purchase what it is meant to purchase. When a rocket team gets lucky and a tank dies in the gate of a farm, the gap that should open behind that wreck does not. A wrecker slides in cables, Sing infantry hold both sides, and the lane is a lane again. The rhythm that once belonged to ambush is now the rhythm of removal. Some of the collapse is language. The ring becomes a sector, then a series of localities, then a list of the day's patrol routes. Men who said starvation with conviction now speak of delay, then of shaping operations, then of the need to withdraw to better ground. The myth needed the noun. The facts reduce it to verbs. Wait, hold shift, try again. Under those verbs, winter is no longer a weapon. It is just the medium for work. When morning breaks after a night of failed pinches, the men at the seam feel the change in their bodies more than in their minds. They are still cold, but they do not feel the special cold of being on the wrong side of a stopwatch. Trucks keep coming. Litters keep going. The town breathes in and out. What remains to the besieger is bravery and local skill, and that is not nothing, but it is not a system that can win by itself. The corridor has turned what was supposed to be a slow, almost bloodless strangling into ordinary danger. And ordinary danger is something the other side is set up to trade against without breaking. The collapse is not a crash. It is a thinning, a loss of pressure that everyone feels when they touch the line. By dusk, the ring is no longer a ring in practice. It is a set of hard points that must now defend themselves from being pried apart, and the initiative that once lay in a schedule now lies in trucks that do not stop for snow. That was the last day starvation had authority here. In the days after the corridor opened, the town changed tone from ration counting to route management. Trucks arrived in files that looked endless in the snow glare, and the first consequence was simple. Batteries fired at the rates their tables intended, not at the rationed drip that had marked the siege. Surgical teams rotated cases instead of gambling on weather. Company cooks measured meals instead of halving them. The perimeter that had been a shrinking ring became depth again, with relief companies stepping into foxholes still warm from their predecessors and then pushing patrol lines outward to clear the fields that had fed the ambushes. German attempts to reclose the seam continued, but began to read like rehearsals rather than attacks. Units arrived in packets, found the artillery already speaking their grid squares, and withdrew to new hedges that no longer overlooked a starving town, but faced a moving road. The ring's language shifted further from starvation to interdiction, then to delay, then to withdrawal under pressure. The weather remained the same, hard and impersonal, yet it stopped deciding outcomes because the side that could move under it had written a schedule that survived ice, darkness, and lost bridges. Evidence of the break multiplied and travelled. Reports and photographs circulated of the meeting south of the town, where the first tanks touched the first engineers, and they acquired a weight out of proportion to the frame, proof that the siege logic could be beaten by procedure, persistence. After-action summaries hardened into orders of the day. Load smoke forward. Pre-register likely yards. Keep engineers at the head of serials. Treat every lane as reversible, and every pause as a target. What had been a set of improvisations in a blizzard became standing practice along the front. For the defenders inside the town, the psychological vector reversed. The rumour mill that once counted days to collapse began counting names of units seen on the road. The cold still bit, but no one mistook cold for a plan anymore. For the besiegers, the aura of inevitability thinned. Ambush remained lethal, bravery remained common, but outcomes no longer accrued toward surrender. Each local success paid for nothing beyond its own smoke and splinters. The calculus favoured the side that could repeat corrections faster. In the weeks that followed, the corridor widened from a lane to a belt. Wreckers pulled hulks aside and left them in snowbanks like punctuation. Bridgeheads in the approaches grew timbered and stable. Maps that had been circles turned into arrows. The large lesson settled in, without ceremony, starvation, as a weapon needs time-protected routes and fuel to keep a cordon tight. Deprived of those, it decays into scattered fires that light the road for someone else's convoy. Two questions linger and deserve argument. If the heavy armour, the fuel trains, and the engineer density that enabled the break had been assembled 6 weeks earlier, does the mythology of encirclement fail before the Ardennes ever bites deep? And was the besieger's toolkit truly superior in the abstract, or had it already lost the contest that mattered, the contest of replacement, repair, and reattempt? Next comes a close look at the other pillar of winter confidence, the medium tanks that were supposed to bar any road once and for all. We will follow them into the same lanes and yards to see what remains when procedure meets reputation.